now the drums beat up again, for all true soldier gentlemen, then let us list and march, I say, over the hills and far away, over the hills and o'er the main, to Flanders, Portugal and Spain. Queen Anne commands and we'll obey, over the hills and far away. All gentlemen that have a mind to serve the Queen that's good and kind, come list and enter into pay, then o'er the hills and far away, over the hills and o'er the main, to Flanders, Portugal and Spain. Queen Anne commands and we'll obey, over the hills and far away. No more from sound of drum retreat, while Marlborough and Galway beat the French and Spaniards every day, when over the hills and far away, over the hills and o'er the main, to Flanders, Portugal and Spain. Queen Anne commands and we'll obey, over the hills and far away.
Hello friends and gamers, welcome to the Fortress. Today we're doing a strategic briefing for the Allies for turn 5. So turn 5 is complete and this is at the end, the wrap up, the go over the map and unfolding of some of my plans. Of course this is confidential, so do not share it even in an oblique way with my combatants, my opponents rather, because it may help them along. It may be something that they did not quite realize that would be to my advantage and would would be negated by you telling. So the order of what I'm going to do and which order I'm going to play it is, since there's so much across the whole board, my focus is fairly widely spread. It's a wide view of the entire war at this stage. So I'm going to go over it nation by nation and just as it sees fit without zooming from map end to map end. So we'll start with the British forces, the Great Britain. So on the islands, we have a fairly equal defense. We do not expect to attack anywhere. So these militia are idle up until the Germans build another transport or absorb this nationalist transport into their cause. Now, I had half expected the nationalist Republican Spanish to work their way back up here because supposedly they can come into the Baltic Sea. But they have not. They've sat off the Canary Islands and just waited there, unless I'm missing something else on the map, which is absolutely fine too in that case. So the militia stands idle. We have this strategic bomber, which is also free. Of course, the strategic bomber can do some bombing runs against these factories here, but to be honest, I don't think that would do us much good. Sure, we could reduce their factories bit by bit, but they got so many factories that's a little bit pointless over here. I'd rather do it as opportunity strikes, perhaps against the Italians, perhaps against something else. We shall see. But it's going to be more of a not bombing, but more of a combative role, at least initially, until later on, until we have more fighters, until we have more strategic bombers. The fighters are a force to be scrambled with, and also for the defense of France itself. So if France survives a turn, then they can be deposited anywhere that we see as a threat, in Paris or in southern France. These are two options, but likely Paris. They can reach from that position. We can scramble, or three fighters can scramble from an airbase, so that would change matters for the positioning of the French fighter over there. The airborne here is a versatile tool. I always try to build some airborne on the map, as any nation I play. It's always well worth building. The obvious choice right now for an attack would be Berlin. Of course, Berlin's going to be protected by the end of next turn. I would be surprised if they did not move some units into there at the end of their next turn. They'll build some tanks likely and build build a unit right after, or move units into there right after. That is my expectation. It's more as the purpose of it is to keep keep it so that the Germans have to protect everywhere, that they have to be aware of that I could snipe them at any point. For instance, I may not get this next turn, but I may get Austria. Can I reach? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, if Alsace-Lorraine survives. I could snipe this area. So I could grab it for 2. The airborne costs 3. If I hold on to this for 1 turn, it's paid for itself, basically. And if I take a German casualty, if the Germans attack and try to take it back, and the Germans take a casualty, then it's more than paid for itself quite quickly. So I always like to have those as kind of a harassing force, especially if I could get prime targets worth money and in mountains, behind rivers, as this one happens to be. So well worth getting, in my opinion. It has a secondary role too. Air transports can transfer infantry anywhere across the board from airport to airport. So if I had it, I could be able to, if I had infantry here, I could possibly transfer them to Paris or to southern France as well. Currently, this airborne is for another purpose, or its third purpose is this, that if the British fighters do move, if France survives 1 turn and the British fighters do come to Paris, and from there they can scramble to the adjacent areas, then they could only scramble to the adjacent areas if we have a British unit present. So if we have this airborne dropped off in Alsace-Lorraine or southern France, then we're fairly set in that regards. Now, the question is, can I drop off an airborne if there's no airbase? I'll have to look into that. They may be only able to airborne assault, but maybe that's worth taking a look at for me. Okay, this channel force has a specific purpose as well, and it's primarily to receive the Polish fighter. Now, if the Polish fighter survives 1 round, I'm going to simply fly it all the way to this aircraft carrier and land it there. It's worth 10 IPP. It's easily lost in Warsaw, so it's well worth having here. Of course, I could get some casualties. I could cause some casualties with it, but I'd rather keep it as a versatile unit to behind a bunch of counter fodder that I can use later on. This fleet here is a bit of a bait fleet. Its intent is to absorb some of those German aircraft. If the Germans send all their fleet into this position, into Sea Zone 25, with this submarine present as well, and all their aircraft, they may win this battle, depending on how well I roll. But if that roll works out average, then we'll pretty well decimate each other. So that will work in many-fold reasons for me, because it means that there's less German aircraft going into France, and that means I don't have to worry about the German forces anymore. Of course, the German forces are not strong. Personally, as a German force, I like to keep that fleet as a fleet in being, as a constant threat, as opposed to being wiped out and not having to be concerned about. But this fleet, if it doesn't serve as bait, it serves as protection for this aircraft carrier, which will come in useful later on for if we receive that fighter, that we can do a bunch of nonsense with it later on as well. Okay, so that takes care of the English Channel Fleet and our forces in England. And like I said, that strategic bomber will probably not reside there, and it'll move around a little bit and stay versatile. My whole strategy is going to be fairly versatile turn by turn, but I try to keep it with an overarching strategy. Okay, let's take a look at this Gibraltar force right now. So first we have 2 infantry and 2 kind of militia type units, a tactical bomber, and this fleet. Now this fleet is both an anti-submarine fleet and an anti-Italian fleet. That's the conceptual idea behind them. So we have 3 battleships, battlecruiser, 2 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 4 destroyers, and 2 submarines. If we go neck to neck or head to head against the Italians, then we're fairly equal. I think I have a slight edge on them just because I can absorb a few extra hits on my battleship, but they have more submarines. So I have higher power units, and I could absorb a few more hits. Plus I could send my aircraft to challenge them as well. So that is what that force is for, and that will keep them honest as far as I'm concerned. It'll keep them out of harm's way. It also has a secondary purpose as well, just as everything does, multifold purpose. Well, okay, let's talk about the anti-submarine force. So anti-submarine can now hit in all adjacent territories, which is well worth it if need be, through this fighter. If Paris falls, then we don't need to worry about it, about convoy defense, but this fighter can land in France as well, if need be. Now, I think anti-submarine stuff is complex enough and also simple enough that we don't need to get into it here. That will kind of evolve depending on what the Germans do. Now, let's talk about the French fleet before we go on to France itself. This French fleet is placed in this position. It did not need to be as beefy as it is. There's a reason for what that is. There's always. If I had less fleet here, if I had half my force here, half my force here, the Germans could probably hit this position with 3 submarines. Now, 3 submarines is not very strong, and likely they don't want to hit the French force. They want to absorb them, they want to incorporate them into the German fleet anyways, so they don't want to wipe out this fleet. But if they did, then I wanted a sufficiently strong enough force to intimidate them. If the Italians attack in this position, in hoping to shore bombard, do an amphibious assault, as well as coming across the border with those troops, which they likely wouldn't do. They might just send one unit to coming off the coast and one battleship shore bombarding. They might blast through this. But again, they don't want to wipe out the fleet. The fleet is a bit of an insurance from shore bombardment or from amphibious assault. I find the Axis player generally wants to keep them alive. This fleet here is a bit of a bait. 4 German submarines can hit into this position, and the reason that they might want to is because of this German transport could want to drop off troops here just to reduce the French income just by that one more. By dropping troops off here, they'll be fairly safe. They declare war against France, they land here, safe. If the Germans do come here with their fleet, we can smack them with our British fleet over here by maritime air patrolling to this position. Now, the French fleet is probably going to do some more moves, likely going to spread themselves a little bit thinner in the Atlantic, so that the German forces will have to do some attacks against them and sink some French ships if they want to do any invasions with this force here. So we'll spread ourselves thin across these 2 areas as well as this one here. Those 3 areas will be covered. And if they're wiped out, they're wiped out. That means that the Axis don't get them in their die rolls later on, and yeah, that's just the way she goes with those ones. They oftentimes don't survive anyways. Okay, let's take a look at France, because France is where it all hinges on, and I'm going to zoom in. The defense of France is looking fairly meaty at this point, but it looks like it, but it actually isn't that tough just yet. So we have, what is this, 8 infantry, I think? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 infantry, somewhere like that. And here we have about 5 infantry, 4 militia and 2 militia, 1 infantry here. Now, this force here can withstand an attack across this border. I guaranteed, I've done the math, they can withstand an attack from that border. The Germans will not attack across there. The Germans will attack from Belgium, through Belgium rather, into Picardy. And at that point, they'll use their second impulse to either go into Paris or Alsace-Lorraine. They're not powerful enough now to do that. They would have to, they're going to give us one more turn of building up before then. So what we'll purchase likely is an anti-aircraft here in Paris, just to intimidate them that little bit further, as well as stash ourselves up with as much militia and infantry as we can. Mostly militia until we have any bucks spent, and then spend the last on infantry is the goal. Now the fighter can probably come down here to southern France. Southern France I could scramble from southern France into both Paris and Alsace-Lorraine, so I could place it there. The only risk there is if the Italians do attack, then likely I'll lose that fighter. But if the Italians, if I expect a German attack next turn, then at that point, the British could make a landing here in southern France anyways, and so the Italians won't attack. So I can guarantee that the Italians won't cross that border, and therefore I could actually move this infantry up to that position. The only reason I will not, or would be hesitant to, is the Germans may use their airborne to drop into southern France. If they do that, then they only need to take out Alsace-Lorraine and southern France and then be set. I think a better option would be something like placing an infantry or a militia in this position here. If we leave this open, it doesn't really matter. But even then, you get my point. If we protect this territory and this territory, we're fairly set. But if we leave this empty and they drop off an airborne into this position, well, then that changes things. So what it's going to look like is this fighter is going to come to this position here. And then we're also going to possibly replace that with one militia. I think, but I'll have to debate that depending on what the German player does. But I think you get my point in that regards. So the British will react by dropping troops off here and dropping off the aircraft here, and if needed, dropping off an airborne into Alsace-Lorraine. Now again, I don't know if I already said this in this video or not, but look into the rules for me if you can drop off airborne in non-combat. Just basically port them by air transport and drop them off, and it's not even going to airbase, it's just simply being dropped off in Alsace-Lorraine, and I don't think Alsace-Lorraine has an airbase, so yeah, that would defeat that purpose. So yeah, if you want to look it up for me, that'd be awesome. I know it's in the rules, so or might be in the rules. Okay, now one of the things I don't like doing, or I found was a bit of an exploit in previous version of the rules, was something I call the Joan of Arc exploit. Now I don't know if I told you about this before, but since France has a treasury amount, currently it sits at, what is it at? $11. So with $11, that's what Germany would capture if they conquered Paris this upcoming turn. A little trick that I would do is just declare war as Germany against France just prior to the turn, just as France is collecting its income. And then the only person that could react is the Americans, where they would collect a little bit extra income, but that way you'd have a bigger treasury as France. You'd collect their wartime income, which I believe is $16. That is one potential exploit. But anyways, let's not talk about that one. So the Joan of Arc exploit is essentially going up in flames and wasting your treasury on something that you perceive as meaningful and keeping the treasury out of German hands. Now that is a bit of a debated issue now. They've tweaked the rules. If France declares war on any neutral power, then the American income goes down by 8. France declaring war on any major power will cost them $10. But if I can leverage this to my advantage somewhere on the board, then I will be ahead. I won't be necessarily ahead, but I will have a slight income increase that for the British or whoever else. And sure, the Americans will suffer by a -8 for several turns, but maybe it may not work out long term, but I want to try it out this turn. So you may think otherwise, but that's a foolish idea, but let's try it out and see how it goes. So the only time I would do that is if it looks that if France is going to fall, then I would do that. And that means that my British forces are kind of free to do what they want to. If they're not there to back up France and help secure southern France or Paris or anything like that, then we're free to move these forces wherever we want to. So what I am going to do with those is I'm going to move them somewhere else. So let me collect myself for just a second. If France falls, I'm going to waste the French income on a declaration of war against a neutral nation. There are several candidates as to who I would do it against, who I would declare war against, and it is all with nations that have an income of above 2. Now, there are several that do that. Brazil and Argentina have 3. Then there is southern Iran and Turkey that also have 3. Of course, there's Yugoslavia and those, but those, you're jumping right into the thick of things, so there's not much sense in doing that. I don't want to deal with the whole Monroe Doctrine thing right now. That is besides the point, but let's look at the more utilitarian side of things. If I declared war against Portugal as France, that would make them Axis. On the British turn, of course, the Axis can do non-combat movement with their ships. That means that they would be moving this ship somewhere. But non-combat movement, they can't move this militia. So on the following turn, I could actually pick up some infantry, drop them off here in Portugal. Likewise, I can do the same thing here in this territory here in Portuguese East Africa. Pardon this mess. In Portuguese East Africa with this infantry, picking up this extra buck. So I would be up by $2. Germany would miss out on $10, and America would miss out on $8 per turn for the next bunch of turns until it's at war. So there is that. I've done the math, and I think it's worth doing. I mean, this is a controversial issue, just like most of the things I try out. But I like to try out new things. So that is one of the options. Another option is a little bit more drastic move, and it is against Turkey. Now, if France goes to war against Turkey, that means that the German player can non-combat move the Turkish units around. And that is a slightly bigger deal because the Turkish units would automatically become German, and I don't think it becomes German homeland in that case, and that's a question worth asking too, because all these units become German then, because they're going to be at war with the British Commonwealth. So the militia, would it or would it not be able to move? Because technically, if they're German units, would they be able to move in Turkish territory? So that's worth asking. Now, the British can bring up 6 units worth of landing forces to land in Turkey. Now, I don't know about this one because it is a little bit more of a difficult option. Ideally, I'd go for Iran, but I'm not geared towards Iran at this point. So that means the Germans could simply move all their units into Turkey, into Istanbul, and hold it out the entire game because it's a city and a mountain territory. So that is a lot more difficult than I want to challenge myself against. A better option would be Portugal, which I may take up in that case. There's other options too. There's also Iraq, which is worth $2, and it's only 1 territory to worry about. Slightly off map, but there it is. I have this medium bomber that can hit that location. And lastly, there is Iran. Now, Iran is nice. It would keep it out of the hands of the Russians and also have us nice and adjacent to the Russians. The problem is we're not geared to attack Iran. We're out of position for it. So we could move some units around next turn so that we would be in position for it. Specifically, some Indian forces could be up against this border next turn. Apart from that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, apart from that, we have nothing that can reach. Sadly. Yeah, we have nothing that could reach otherwise. Yes, that's about it for those. Yeah. So those are my 3 options, I guess. Portugal, Turkey, and Iran. Now, Portugal is least risky, but least reward. Iran is about medium, because you're attacking into mountains. But they're so far away from anything with such a few amount of troops, just 2, that we could likely hold out against we could likely crush them fairly quickly. Now, we lose out income on our first turn because we probably would not capture southern Iran immediately, but we may. That's an iffy situation, but we may possibly win out on that one. Especially if we move some of these Anzac forces across to here, we may be able to swing that fairly okay. Now, what else do we have? Okay, so that's talking about the French Jeanne d'Arc exploit, or no longer exploit, but strategy. Whether it turns out to be a good strategy or not, will be left to see. Now, we would have a lot of forces to attack Turkey if need be. We'd have 6 land units, plus aircraft from this aircraft at the very least, plus a fighter would be going into there. So we have a few options that can go there. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. But everything else would have to be staged out of Cyprus, which we'd have to gear towards anyways. So Turkey is the least likely of the options because of that. Now, the defense of Egypt is going to be fairly easy. The Italians have not built up any transports. They've instead gone for battleships, and so we don't have to worry about anything for several turns. We have sufficient forces here to hold off any attack. The German forces themselves are only here just to probably, who knows what they're here for, but they're probably going to do taking out some French territories, but that's about it. This force here, this Italian force, we could challenge by defense of this territory here. Of course, they could probably beat us with 1 mountain infantry and 1 fighter, but that's still, that would be still of a headache for them anyways. Moving on, we have this small fleet here. Now, this fleet here is fairly versatile as kind of an anti-submarine fleet. Additionally, they are here to move some troops around from South Africa if need be. Now here we see some drastic moves by the Japanese forces. They have done, as you've seen from other videos, they've taken over much of the Dutch East Indies. Now they've increased their income considerably, but the Netherlands have 6 territories left. 1, 2, 3, 2 in South America and 1 in the Netherlands. So the Japanese are going to be taking out these 3 territories in the near future. What will the Japanese do after that is a little bit up for debate. If I was them, I would take out Australia. Not because Australia makes loads of money. It makes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, $7 bucks, but they've got one of the few shipyards in this area. And by taking that out, you decrease the threat, and it makes more sense than going all the way to America. Another option is taking out India. Between the two, I think 1, 2, 3, 4. It depends on what the Americans are doing and where they're at in income. If you have time, you take out India. If you don't have time, you take out Anzac. I think that's what I would do in that circumstance, because China is too far gone at this point. Okay, let's touch on the fleet a little bit. This Anzac fleet, I've yet to decide what they do. It depends on the Germans, but I could move some units from this position all the way out to Maharashtra over here, from which they can hit southern Iran on the following turn, wasting that French income and getting back $3 for the following turn. This territory here, it's better to have it in my hands, southern Iran, because if it becomes common turn, I lose a wartime bonus. So in wartime, this would be worth, if I captured it all, it would be worth $5 a turn for me, if and only $2 if it remains neutral, which it may not do. I think the USSR is taking some liberties, and they haven't built up any forces yet. It's gonna be a tough fight for them, and I don't know how much I can or want to help them because of their because of their CCP presence. I think I'd rather let the CCP help them instead of the Allies. Okay, Malaya has been defended heavily. Part of that is because it's such a good defensive position. It's got already a coastal artillery, it's got a fortification, it's going to be a thorn in the side of the Japanese forces. It's got a dockyard, so I could repair damage there. The other dockyards are here in Ceylon and one in Hong Kong. So apart from those, I'd have to go all the way to Anzac, Sydney to repair anything. So I do want to keep this one in the running. I think I'm more worried about losing Calcutta, so I do need to boost that one up with, well, I could go up to three militia in that position next turn, which would be quite handy, I think. Now, so the Anzac forces may spread some troops around a little bit, but at this point, the Anzac is only going to produce submarines and units to defend its own home country. China. Now, okay, China is, well, we've struck kind of a truce with the CCP, and it's a devil's deal. It's not ideal because we've kind of come to agreement and said that we'll allow the CCP to evolve, and they've given us their word that they're going to evacuate Kwangtung. Now, personally, I think Hilltop Pillbox is trustworthy, and he's insisted that he is, and I don't really have a choice at this point. I had the option to invade Kwangtung this past turn, but I thought I wouldn't risk it and just see well, we'll cross that bridge when it comes to it, but if we're wiped out, we're wiped out. There's not much we can do at this point. The CCP is just much too strong. Holding this position will at least have us with, they'll have a -1 on their first round of combat crossing this river, and apart from that, there's not too much we can do. They're just too strong. So hopefully they evacuate Kwangtung next turn, we'll march into here, and eventually we hope to take out Hainan as well, and hopefully he gives us Yunnan. Yunnan is for wartime bonus, will give us a +1, I believe. So if I add all these territories together, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. $5 a turn. $5 is not much, but we'll have a port here, and we'll have access to the Burma Road, and that will allow us to slowly acquire then lease from our allies, if they can spare it, and build up our own forces to hopefully overthrow the CCP, or at least out-survive them. And also, if we have Kwangtung, we protect Hong Kong from an attacks by the CCP, which is worth 2 to the FEC. So if it survives, that's a good thing if it survives. Now, you've seen already that part of my tendency is to build up certain strong points across the board. Places like Eastern Egypt, Gibraltar, and the Philippines. Malaya is another one, but the Philippines seems to be a larger one in that picture. So the Philippines already has 4 militia on it. Now, the Philippines is only worth $2. There's no bonuses beyond that, but it is something just to hold off and intimidate the Japanese. It's a good defensive position because it's mountain territory, and so that means that they're going to really have to struggle to get into that territory, if they choose to get that territory at all. Part of this is a bit of a deterrent to the Japanese, so they don't declare war on, they don't mess around too much with us over here, and kind of, in some way, force them towards China, if possible, which they wouldn't do. I wouldn't do if I was in their position. I think another option for them, though it's not really that obvious, is an invasion of Russia, of Soviets. It would only cost them $5. If they go to war against the British Commonwealth, it cost the Americans 5d12. If they go to war against the Soviets, it's only 5 IPP of USA income increase. So if I was in their shoes, I would probably invade there, especially if I timed it with a German attack. Of course, at that point, you'd have the CCP hammering at your door, but you have them here. They would be here at a choke point in Rehi, and so by holding Rehi, it wouldn't be that bad. I don't think it would be that bad. Unfortunately, the CCP have a huge stack of militia now, so they would just be throwing that cannon fodder into the battle, and that would be quite insane to see. Don't underestimate cannon fodder. All right. The French fleet, if it survives, is going to cause havoc among Japanese convoy lines. We have from this line here all the way down in Malaya, all the way up to Japan. We have $10 worth, which we can peck away at between the British sub, coastal sub, and the four French submarines. We can probably reduce that turn by turn. Part of that is to keep the Japanese Air Force in this vicinity and just keep them on constant maritime air patrol. And then when they leave, if they move their aircraft, that's when we swoop in and snag another few bucks here and there. That is our goal with them. We have a total of 5 submarines, and they have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 aircraft. So we're short by 2 submarines, but overall, they'll be keeping a lot of them busy, is the hope, and we'll try to keep out of their reach all the time. Yes, I think that covers the Japanese, the KMT, the CCP. The CCP, their goal is to evolve to major power, and after that, well, it's anyone's guess. They'll either go after the KMT, or they can go after the Japanese. Now, the Japanese are weak. There's also the Mongolians. Now, the Mongolians is an option. You could pick up $2 from them. It's worth doing. And then at that point, who knows how it's going to look like. I predict it may be something like an attack against Japan, KMT, Mongolia, and that's about it. You know, if I hold on to Kwangtung, and if I hold on to Yunnan, which is not a huge odds of it just yet, but if I do, then I can protect Annam Tonking and Cochin China for France. That's the goal, anyways. Okay, the Americans. Now, I'm not going to even look at that side over here, the Pacific side. Let's swing back just to this side here. The Americans are not doing too much. As you've noticed before, they just don't produce anything. They're stocking up all their money, but they are lend-leasing to the Dutch here. Now, I was debating for a while if I should lend-lease to this island here. So I did succeed in my role, so I could have placed 2 militia in here, and I would have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units present here. But the sheer amount of forces he can throw against me, 2 battleships, 2 cruisers, a battle cruiser if he wants to for shore bombardment, that would be sufficient to wipe out a couple of my units. Then he's got all his aircraft, and even then he's got 2 special naval landing forces to absorb casualties. So at the end of the day, if I placed them here, I would not survive very long anyways. I thought it was much better. Well, another option was place 1 unit here and 1 unit here, so as to at least force them to divert some of their aircraft in the assistance of capturing those territory. But I didn't do that. Instead, I placed them in the Netherlands. There's reasons for that, and the reasons are simply it's a toehold on the continent. If France falls, then Germany would have to eventually take out the Netherlands, because if they don't, the Americans are going to send a unit here each and every turn until Japan declares war on the British Commonwealth or the USA, and then they would flip to becoming the Commonwealth, well, the Allies at least, right? At that point, we would hopefully have a few troops on there and have a landing position with which we could threaten the Rhineland, Western Germany. That is our hope with them. So each turn we hope to be successful in our recruitment role, and at the very least, the Americans will lend-lease them 1 infantry each and every turn. Now, they will probably not become super strong because the Germans, of course, have got a mighty tank army that they're going to build and a mighty air force as well. But it's something of a start and a little bit of a dent to what they can do. And at the very least, hopefully they take off a few more casualties than they take off of us. That's the hope anyways. Okay, and I think that wraps up our strategic analysis. Now, please feel free to ask questions and also make a suggestion for what you want to see. I'm going to cover a little bit. Next turn is going to probably be when the war breaks out, so the strategy will just jump into play, and all these things I've kind of outlined with you, one of them will be engaged one way or another. It won't be next turn, sorry, we're in end of turn 5. It won't be turn 6 because I predict the Germans are still going to build up. It'll be turn 7. Yeah, it'll be turn 7, July 1939, the historical start date of war. So I'll have one more round of building and moving before things engage, I do believe. And at that point, we'll have to see. So the Canadians, lastly, I have done very little as the Canadians. Now, some of you may know, I am the designer of the Canadian expansion, and I declare it is flawed. It's flawed, and it's also version 2. It was never updated to version 3, despite what it says. I don't mean to say that with hostility. It is, I still stand by it. It's still fairly good, but it is not as good as it could be. So I would go so far as to say we shouldn't play it up until it improves. Now, we could play it for this game, but I do see glaring flaws in it that need to be corrected. One of them being the whole Bohemia, that Bohemia was not captured. Another one being the reference sheet says Canada's income is worth, what does it say? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It says it's worth 5, but the territory value of the map, it says 6. There's one in British Columbia as well. There's other ones with just the way the wording is and such, so the Canadians are not doing much. I have saved their income, so it's not because I don't want to play them that I haven't done anything with them. I have saved their income because they do have some units that are quite excellent. One of them being the Corvette. The Corvette costs about $4, and it is only good for escort duty. It's taken last in combat, so it's going to be useless as cannon fodder, but if as escorting, it's cheap enough and provides a decent hit that it can challenge some of those submarines. But nonetheless, they have currently 15 or, well, let's see, 17 IPP? Something like that, 17 IPP. And with that money, they can lend these to the Netherlands when the time is right, or they can lend these to France when the time is right. If we lend these to them at aircraft, and hopefully France still holds on to its southern French territory, then we could lend these to them at aircraft directly to southern France, which is partially why we actually have this fleet here as well. Additionally, the Americans can lend these to them, a unit as well, to southern France, and so we would see a nice substantial force there being able to defend everything. That is the hope anyways, the hope and the dream. Okay, thank you all for watching the strategy video, and like I said, if you have questions, or if you have suggestions on what you want to see in the following turn, then let me know. I may touch on Russian strategy next turn, even though it'll be very busy for what I have, but my read on what the Russian strategy is, which is basically not much. Not much for the Russians, but more for the Republic in Spain and the CCP. But I've covered them already. Okay, thank you all for watching, and bye.